Alright. Were you allowed to play with girls' toys, or did your parents allow you to play with that if you wanted to?
I played with anything that I could find to play with. Mostly in my generation it was sticks, stones, dirt.
Yeah. Did you, along with that, did you have any female siblings?
No, I had no siblings.
So you're the only child?
Yes.
Okay. Do you think because of that they weren't as strict with what you played with?
I had little female friends.
Mm-hmm.
One lived next door. I remember her name was Margie. And I didn't have any male friends when I was tiny. But as I grew up, I would have male friends one at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And I would bring them home and try to make them part of my family. I had another brother.
Yeah. Alright. Were you treated differently because you were male in your generation?
I think so. In my generation, males got more attention than females. But not that I ever took note of, because it was the norm.
Yeah, you were just used to how things went in those times.
Mm-hmm.
Mikey told me that you were born during the Great Depression.
Well, yeah, 1934, at the end of the Depression.
Yeah.
And for my first few years, I noticed that all of our neighbors were friendly and helpful. Most of them were immigrants, mm-hmm. and still spoke in their home languages and our language. The lady behind me spoke Italian, and I learned a few Italian words, and the lady on the other side of us was Polish. I learned a few Polish words, and so on and so forth.
I'm sure your parents told you how the Great Depression affected them. How did it affect them? Do you remember gender-wise? Do you remember the women doing specific things that your parents told you, or?
Well, right after I became aware of my surroundings and what was going on in the world, we had the war. Mm-hmm. And that kind of ended the Great Depression. During the Depression, there was a shortage of males because they traveled to find work. They went to California, to Texas, all over the place, just to find enough money to send home. But when I was born, my father died. And so I was raised strictly by my mother. And most of my caretakers were women through my formative years.
What standards did you have in your household because you were male? Like, what they expect you to do around the house?
Well, as I grew up, until I was about 8 or 9, I didn't really do much of anything around the house. Then my mother and I moved off, and we went into an apartment building, and I was expected to clean the bathroom. There was 3 families shared one bath. I was expected to keep that clean. I was expected to keep the hallways clean. I was expected to scrub the stairs. We lived on the 3rd floor. And I had to scrub the floors and sweep them, and run to the store and run errands for my mother.
Normally people like to choose the male gender to do heavier chores.
Yes.
Did you ever do any of that stuff because you were the male?
As I got older, It was during the war years. My mother worked in the steel mill, and I went out and got a job. I worked as a paper carrier in the morning before school. After school, I had an hour at the paper stand down at this Main Street, and then after that, I'd come home, get something to eat, and then I'd go to work at Isley's, mop the floors, put the chairs up on the tables, clean the meat grinder, clean the slicer, and after that I'd go to the bowling alley and set pins for women's bowling league. And I gave most of the money to my mother for our support. And that's it. No, I didn't do actually any heavy work except lugging the paper bag.
According to your mother, what was more important to her, do you think? Raising a family or going to school?
Raising a family. Me going to school. To her, me going to school was important. To her, providing for her and I was important. Till I was 13 and she married.
Do you remember what you thought was more important to you at that time? Like, have you ever thought about after you get older to that age, would you rather raise a family or go on to a higher education?
Raise a family.
Whenever you were in school, did you notice any distinct differences between the girls and the guys, as in wardrobe and what they liked versus the other gender and
yeah,
kind of thing?
Yeah. Well, girls were always more feminine. They didn't play any sports. The boys all played sports that kind of roughhousing, basketball, football. Even the games we played out in the playground, the boys all tended to form on one side and the girls on the other side. The girls would play jacks and jump rope, and the boys would play almost anything that came to hand.
How did they dress?
Boys dressed in jeans, black shoes, highly polished, and white t-shirts usually. That was almost a uniform for the boys. The girls had poodle skirts, Cinderella skirts, puffy sleeve blouses. Most of them had longer hair to the shoulders, and so on and so forth.
Have you ever been treated differently than a girl for doing the same crime, as in getting in trouble for doing the same thing? Were you punished differently?
In school?
Just in general, yeah.
In school, I noticed I never got in much trouble other than not doing homework, but the boys that got in trouble would get a smack on the back of the head from our male teachers for talking or passing notes or something like that. The girls would get nothing but a lifted eyebrow.
Alright, growing up in your generation and knowing what was the norm for male and female, what do you expect now from your wife to do, female-wise?
Well, same thing we did then, cooking, cleaning the house, but she should have help, of which I'm sorry to say, I do with love.
But you do the other things that she would rather you do, like the fixing and...
Oh yeah, do the grass cutting, leaf breaking, firewood hauling.
But I think that still falls into the black and white male and female chores.
Yes.
But you do at least help each other out, whereas if she doesn't...
Whenever I can.
Yeah.
Whenever I'm asked. With whatever I'm asked.
And she doesn't get punished for not cooking for a night.
Oh no.
Yeah.
No. Usually holler at my wife for anything other than wasting money.
Alright. How did you treat your kids gender-wise? Were you tougher on the boys than
Yes.
you are?
Yes. I very rarely had to ever spank the girls, although they were probably as bad as the boys. But the boys were, wow. They were tough little guys.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I was more demanding of them than I was my two girls.
Do you think growing up with just your mother had anything to do with that? Because you never had a father, really.
No, it's just the way things were.
Mm-hmm.
Boys had more expected of them than girls did. Girls were expected to grow up and marry and reproduce. Boys were expected to grow up, marry, and take care of the children produced and the wife. Women were not expected to have to work outside the home in my generation, but many did because of the war.
Yeah, they recruited women to work and assemble the...
Assembly lines and stuff.
Alright, what is something that you did not absolutely like at all about how women were treated in your generation?
No, I don't like men to bully women, and that started when my stepfather bullied my mother, and he consequently stopped. But I have seen it over and over again in my lifetime that men bully their women.
Because they don't think women can stick up for themselves.
Because they think they can get away with it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like it. But there's nothing I as an individual can do about it.
What about men in your generation? What did you not like about them being
men?
treated?
They're bullying women. I had no opinion. I don't like overly aggressive men, and I don't like underly aggressive men, doormats.
Well, do you remember, because a guy was a guy, do you remember them